When you wake up in the morning, before your feet even hit the floor, you have a choice to make. You can let the day tell you who you are, or you can tell the day who your God is. Psalm 27 opens with a declaration so strong, so unshakable, it can't help but set the tone for everything that follows. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? That's not just poetry. That's not just scripture. It's a battle cry for the soul. It's the kind of statement you don't just read. You plant it deep in your spirit and let it shape your whole outlook. The truth is, light changes everything. You could be in the darkest room, stumbling, unsure of where to put your next step. But the moment the light comes on, clarity returns. You see obstacles for what they are. You recognize the path you couldn't see before. When David says the Lord is his light, he's telling us that God doesn't just give light. He is the light. He's not an accessory to your day. He's the atmosphere that defines it. If you start your day without that light, you're fumbling in shadows, reacting instead of moving with purpose. But when you begin with him, you're walking in the brightness of his presence, and no shadow can dominate you. And then there's salvation. Some of us treat salvation like it's a one-time event, something that happened years ago at an altar. But David speaks of it like a present reality. The Lord is my salvation right now in this moment. That means when you wake up with worries pressing against your mind, when yesterday's disappointments are trying to write today's story, you can lean into the fact that God's saving power is active in your life right now. It's not just that he saved you, it's that he's saving you, still pulling you out of the pit every time life tries to bury you. And strength, the strength of God is not like the strength of man. Human strength runs out. You can be disciplined, motivated, even optimistic, and still hit a wall. But when the Lord is the strength of your life, it's not about what you can carry. It's about who's carrying you. This is why David could look at his enemies, could look at his challenges, and still say, of whom shall I be afraid? Fear doesn't have to vanish for you to move forward. It just has to lose its power to control you. But here's where we get tripped up. We think this kind of confidence is automatic. It's not. You've got to wake up and make the declaration before the enemy makes his announcement. You've got to decide before the phone call, before the email, before the headlines, the Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is the strength of my life. You don't wait for your emotions to agree with you. You speak it until your emotions line up with the truth. Some mornings you'll wake up and it will feel easy. The sun is shining, the coffee's hot, and the day looks promising. But other mornings, you'll wake up in the middle of a storm, sickness in your body, conflict in your relationships, bills on your table. That's when this declaration becomes a weapon. That's when you plant your feet on the floor, lift your head, and say, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? And when you do that, you're not ignoring the storm. You're declaring that the storm doesn't have the final say. You see, fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith thrives in declaration. Fear needs darkness to grow, but light exposes its weakness. That's why the enemy wants you to start your day distracted, rushed, already in reaction mode, because if you don't pause to make this declaration, you start living as if your circumstances are bigger than your God. But if you start your day with the light, salvation, and strength of the Lord, your circumstances may still be real, but they are no longer ruling you. Imagine stepping into your workplace, not with the weight of the day pressing you down, but with the awareness that you are walking in the light of God's presence. Imagine facing that difficult conversation not with dread, but with the conviction that God's salvation is active in your situation right now. Imagine standing before the challenges of the day, not in your own frailty, but in his strength that never runs out. That's not wishful thinking. That's living out Psalm 27 before the world even has a chance to shape your mood. And don't miss this. David isn't just talking himself. He's talking back to everything that would intimidate him. He's talking back to fear. talking back to discouragement, talking back to doubt. Sometimes the most important conversation you'll have in the morning is the one where you tell fear exactly where it stands in the shadow of a God who is your light, your salvation, and your strength. So tomorrow morning, when your eyes open and your mind starts racing, before you check the news, before you scroll through your messages, before you even step out of bed, let the words in your mouth be the truth that redefines your day. The Lord is my light. The Lord is my salvation. The Lord is the strength of my life. And if that's true, then fear has no seat at my table. When the morning comes, it brings with it more than sunlight. It brings voices that try to predict your day before you've even lived it. Sometimes those voices are loud. They whisper in your ear about everything that could go wrong, everything you're not ready for, everything you failed at before. That's why Psalm 27 isn't just a scripture to read, it's a posture to take. It's a reminder that you can either step into the day with your heart anchored in trust, or you can step into the day already wrapped in anxiety. Trust doesn't happen by accident. It's not a feeling that falls out of the sky and lands in your lap before breakfast. Trust is a choice. It's a deliberate decision to lean on what you know about God rather than what you see in your situation. David didn't write Psalm 27 from a palace with no problems. He wrote it in the middle of trouble, surrounded by enemies, uncertainty, and opposition. And yet, he chose to trust. That tells me something powerful. If trust was possible for him in that environment, it's possible for you in yours. We often wake up with a mental list of things that could fall apart today. Bills that need paying, relationships that need mending, deadlines that need meeting. The enemy wants to keep you in a constant state of what if thinking. What if I can't handle it? What if this doesn't work out? What if I fail again? And the danger of that thinking is that it sets the thermostat of your soul before you've even left your bedroom. If you let fear dictate the temperature, the whole day feels cold, heavy, and overwhelming. But trust, that's like stepping into the warmth of God's presence before the frost of anxiety can set in. Fear will always tell you that you have to figure it out. Trust will tell you that God already has it figured out. Fear will keep your eyes on the problem until you forget there's a promise. Trust will keep your eyes on the promise until the problem has no power to control you. When you wake up and choose trust, you're saying, I refuse to let my emotions run my day. I'm letting my faith run it. And let's be real, trusting God doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers. It doesn't mean the storm clears before you've had your coffee. What it means is you decide to stand steady in the storm because you know who's holding the boat. You can be soaked by the rain, wind hitting your face, waves all around, and still deep in your spirit, you know, I'm not going down today because my God doesn't sink. Trust is also a daily reset. You can't store up enough from yesterday to last you a week. Yesterday's trust is a testimony, but today's trust is a decision. That's why David says in Psalm 27 later on, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart. Waiting isn't just sitting around. It's a posture of expectation. It's saying, I'm looking for God to show up in this day, and that expectation shifts the way you handle everything that comes your way. Think about it. If you trust the pilot, you don't get nervous every time the plane hits turbulence. You know the shaking doesn't mean the destination has changed. If you trust the surgeon, you don't doubt every movement in the operating room. You understand the process is part of the healing. If you trust God, you don't panic at every interruption, every delay, every moment that doesn't go the way you planned. You understand that His plan is still in motion, even when you can't see it. But here's where trust gets tested the most. It's not in the big moments where everyone is watching. It's in the quiet moments when no one else sees you wrestling. It's when you're in the car on the way to work and the weight of everything presses on your chest. It's when you're standing in the shower replaying the same worry over and over. That's when you have to open your mouth and talk back to the fear that's trying to grip you. That's when you remind yourself, The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? You don't wait for the fear to go away before you trust. You trust until the fear has nowhere left to live. Some mornings, the enemy doesn't even need to throw new problems at you. He just recycles yesterday's fears. He wants you to wake up rehearsing old wounds and old failures until you've already defeated yourself before the day begins. But when you choose trust over anxiety, you break that cycle. You declare that God's mercy is new every morning. And if His mercy is new, then so is my hope. Trust is not pretending that you don't see the trouble. It's deciding that you see God more clearly than the trouble. It's not ignoring the reality of your situation. It's holding on to a greater reality that God's presence, God's power, and God's promise are already in your situation. That's why David could say, "Whom shall I fear?" Not because danger didn't exist, but because danger didn't have the final word. So when the alarm goes off tomorrow, don't just wake up your body, wake up your spirit. Before anxiety gets a chance to tell you its story, tell it yours. I choose to trust God today. I choose to believe His promises over my fears. I choose to walk into this day with my heart anchored in the one who has never failed me yet. David says in Psalm 27, "One thing I ask from the Lord, this only do I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to gaze on the beauty of the Lord and to seek Him in His temple." That's not just Sunday morning language. That's a lifestyle. He wasn't talking about showing up to a building once a week. He was talking about living in a constant awareness of God's presence. Dwelling is not visiting. Visiting is temporary. Visiting says, I'm here for a moment and then I'll go back to my normal life. Dwelling says, this is where I belong. This is home. Too many people try to face the day as visitors to God's presence instead of residents. We drop in for a prayer, we glance at a verse, and then we rush out to deal with life on our own terms. But David understood that the secret to his strength, his peace, and his clarity was that his whole life was rooted in the presence of God. And when you make that your one thing, everything else finds its place. Notice he said, "Oh, one thing I ask." He didn't say, I've got a long list for God to handle before I can start my day. He didn't say, "Lord, fix all my problems first, and then I'll worship you." He said, if I can just be with you, if I can just see you clearly, if I can just be in the place where your presence is, everything else will work itself out. That's the heartbeat of someone who has learned that God's presence is not an accessory to life. It is life itself. And it's not just about asking to dwell, it's about seeking it. Because there are mornings when life will try to pull you away from that place. Distractions will compete for your attention. Deadlines will shout louder than devotion. Your phone will buzz. Your calendar will demand. And before you know it, you've given the first and best part of your day to everything except the one who holds the day in his hands. Seeking his presence means you push past those distractions. You choose to pause. You decide that nothing is more important than starting from that place of connection with God. David said he wanted to gaze on the beauty of the Lord. That word gaze means more than just a quick glance. It means to look with focus, to behold without rushing. You can't gaze in a hurry. That's why we so often miss God's peace in the morning. We're trying to speed through His presence like we're skimming headlines. But when you take the time to dwell, to gaze, you start seeing Him for who He really is. And when you see Him clearly, your problems shrink to their proper size. There's something powerful about starting your day like that. When you begin from the house of the Lord, not a physical building, but the spiritual posture of His presence, you're not running into the day scattered and unprepared. You're stepping into it anchored and equipped. It's like beginning a journey with a full tank instead of running on fumes. And dwelling doesn't mean you're locked away in a room all day. You can dwell in His presence while driving to work, while making breakfast for the kids, while sitting in a meeting. It's a consciousness, a continual awareness that you're not alone and that God is with you. When you live from that place, even mundane moments become holy ground. The enemy knows this, which is why he'll do everything he can to keep you from dwelling. He'll flood your mornings with business. He'll remind you of yesterday's mistakes. He'll try to make you feel unworthy to enter God's presence at all. But dwelling is not about your worthiness. It's about his willingness to meet you where you are. David was a man with flaws, failures, and regrets, yet he could still say, one thing I seek. That's because he understood that the presence of God is not earned, it's pursued. Some people think they need to wait until life is calm before they can dwell. But David shows us that it's the very presence of trouble that makes God's presence more vital. He talks about enemies, about being surrounded, about days of trouble, and in the middle of that, he's asking to dwell. Because when you live close to God, trouble might still knock on your door, but it won't be able to move into your heart. And when you dwell in his presence, it changes how you respond to everything else. Bad news may still come, but panic won't be your first reaction. Conflict may still arise, but peace will be your default setting. Opportunities may still challenge you, but courage will rise up in you because you've been with the one who is greater than anything you'll face. David said he wanted to seek him in his temple. Seeking means you're not content to stay at a surface level. It's a daily hunger to go deeper, to hear more clearly, to be shaped more fully. That's why starting your day in his presence matters so much. It's the difference between living reactive and living intentional. So before the world pulls you into its noise, before the demands of the day scatter your focus, choose to dwell. Choose to be a resident in God's presence, not just a visitor passing through, because when you start there, you can carry that atmosphere into every room, every conversation, every decision, and no matter what the day brings, you'll know you've already been home. David doesn't deny the reality of problems in Psalm 27. He talks about enemies, about armies encamping against him, about false witnesses rising up. He's not painting a fantasy where everything is smooth and trouble-free. But what's different about David is that he refuses to let the problem become the lens through which he sees his life. He doesn't measure God by the size of his enemies. He measures his enemies by the size of his God. That's a perspective shift, and it changes everything. Most of us wake up and immediately start looking at the problems. We replay the same situations in our minds, analyze all the worst case scenarios, and sometimes even start solving problems that haven't happened yet. But here's the truth. Whatever you magnify will dominate your vision. If you start your day magnifying the problem, you'll live under its shadow. If you start your day magnifying the Lord, you'll live under his covering. It's not about ignoring reality. It's about choosing which reality will have the final say. The trouble you face is real, but so is the presence of God. The threats against you may be real, but so is his protection. Fear may be real, but so is his faithfulness. When you wake up and decide to look at your situation through the lens of God's promises, the facts of your life don't change instantly, but the weight of them does. Think of it like this: when a camera focuses on something close, everything in the background blurs. Your mind works the same way. When you focus on God, the problems don't disappear, but they lose their clarity. They stop being the sharpest thing in your vision. And when your vision changes, your steps change. You stop walking like someone who's outnumbered and start moving like someone who's backed by heaven. David could have spent his mornings listing everything that was against him. Instead, he spent his mornings declaring, "Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident." That's not denial, that's defiance. That's standing in the middle of the battlefield and choosing your point of view. And here's the thing: the enemy knows that if he can control your perspective, he can control your peace. If he can keep you focused on the size of the wave, you'll forget who's in the boat with you. If he can keep your eyes on the darkness, you'll forget the light you're carrying. Perspective is the battleground before the battle even begins. That's why starting your day with God's perspective isn't optional, it's essential. Problems will always try to present themselves as the main character of your story. They want center stage. They want to frame your decisions, dictate your emotions, and set your expectations. But when you start with God's perspective, you remind yourself that the main character is not the problem. It's the God who's writing the story. And sometimes you need to literally talk yourself into that shift. You need to stand in the mirror and say, I know the report, but I also know the healer. I see the need, but I also see the provider. I feel the way, but I also feel the strengthener. I see the enemy, but I also see the deliverer. Speaking it reinforces seeing it. The more you speak God's truth, the more you start to see your life through it. David's perspective was shaped by past experiences with God. He could remember the lion and the bear. He could remember Goliath falling. And because of what he had seen before, he could trust what he couldn't yet see now. That's another secret to maintaining God's perspective. You have to rehearse his faithfulness until it's louder than your fear. When you rehearse the problem, you feed it. When you rehearse God's goodness, you feed your faith. That's why you can face the same problem 2 days in a row and respond differently depending on which one you've been rehearsing. One day it looks impossible. The next day you feel peace about it, not because the problem changed, but because your perspective did. We all know what it's like to wake up and feel overwhelmed before the day has even begun. But that's the perfect moment to shift your gaze. You can either start the day counting all the things working against you, or you can start it counting all the ways God has already proven himself to you. That shift won't make the storm stop instantly, but it will make you stand stronger while it's raging. And let me tell you something, when you see life from God's perspective, you don't just survive the day, you influence it. People around you will notice that you walk with a steadiness they can't explain. You'll be the one in the room who isn't panicking when everyone else is. You'll be the voice that brings calm into the chaos. That's the power of perspective. It doesn't just change you, it changes the atmosphere around you. So tomorrow, before you step into the swirl of noise and demands, lift your eyes above the problem. See the God who is greater. See the one who is your light, your salvation, your strength. And once you see him clearly, you'll never see your problems the same way again. David closes Psalm 27 with a statement that's as bold as the way he began. I remain confident of this. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. That's not a vague hope for something far off in eternity. That's not saying one day, after I'm gone, maybe I'll see God's goodness. No, David is making a declaration about this life. About waking up each morning expecting to encounter the hand of God before the day is over. That's a decision to end your morning not with worry, not with dread, but with victory already in your mouth. Confidence is not just about personality. It's not about walking into the day with your chest out because you think you've got everything handled. Real confidence is rooted in the unshakable belief that God's goodness is not just a theory, it's an active force moving in your life right now. And when you start your morning with that conviction, it reframes how you approach everything that happens afterward. Think about how most people start their day. They're already bracing for what might go wrong. They expect the meeting to be tense. They expect traffic to be bad. They expect bills to pile up, and they live under the weight of those expectations. But David flips the script. He's not bracing for the worst. He's leaning forward for the best. He's anticipating evidence of God's goodness showing up in his path. That doesn't mean nothing hard will happen. It means even in the hard moments, he's looking for God's hand at work. Expectation shapes experience. If you expect trouble, you'll see it everywhere. If you expect goodness, you'll spot it even in the smallest moments. And that's not just positive thinking, that's aligning your heart with the character of God, because the goodness of the Lord is not wishful thinking, it's part of his nature. If he's your shepherd, then goodness and mercy are following you all the days of your life. That means they're behind you, they're with you, and they're ahead of you. Ending your morning with a declaration of victory is more than a motivational moment. It's a spiritual strategy. It's telling your soul where to stand before the battle even starts, because the truth is, if you don't speak victory, life will speak defeat for you. If you don't plant your confidence in God's goodness, the day will try to plant fear, frustration, and doubt instead. You have to set the tone before the world sets it for you. David also says, wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart. Waiting isn't passive, it's active anticipation. It's like a runner in the starting blocks, leaning forward, ready to move at the sound of the gun. Waiting on God means you're expecting Him to show up and you're watching for where He will. That's why David could be strong and take heart, because his heart was anchored in a God who doesn't abandon His people halfway through the story. This is where so many of us lose our confidence. We let delays drain us. We pray and don't see immediate change, so we start doubting whether God is even working. But confidence says, I don't have to see it yet to know it's coming. It's a conviction that the author of your story is still writing, even if you're stuck on a difficult chapter. That's why David could remain confident. He knew God's pen doesn't run out of ink, and His goodness is never on back order. And let's be clear, this confidence isn't built-in comfort. It's forged in the middle of challenges. You don't learn to declare victory when everything is going your way. You learn it when you're in the valley and you still choose to say, I will see the goodness of the Lord. You learn it when the evidence around you doesn't match the promise you're holding, and yet you refuse to let go of the promise. Some mornings, this declaration will come out of your mouth easily. You'll feel the joy, you'll feel the energy, and you'll believe it without hesitation. But other mornings, you'll have to fight for it. You'll have to speak it through tears. You'll have to declare it while your hands are trembling. You'll have to say it before you feel it. And that's when it's the most powerful, because that's when your faith is leading your feelings instead of your feelings leading your faith. David doesn't just say, I think I'll see God's goodness. He says, I will see it. That's the language of certainty. That's the language of someone who knows their God too well to doubt Him now. And that's the language you need to carry into your day. Not maybe God will come through, but I will see Him come through. Not perhaps something good will happen, but His goodness will find me today. So when you stand at the threshold of a new day, decide right there how it's going to end, not by predicting every detail, but by determining the spirit in which you'll walk through it. And let that spirit be anchored in this truth before this day is over. I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living.